My name is Harper Mitchell, and am 34 years old. The moment my mother announced that my sister's kids would eat first while my children waited for leftovers, I felt my world tilt sideways. We were sitting at my parents' dining table on Thanksgiving, the smell of roasted turkey filling their suburban Illinois home. My two children, 7-year-old Tyler and 5-year-old Mia, sat at a separate folding table shoved into the corner like an afterthought. Meanwhile, my sister Victoria's 3 kids, ages 6, 8, and 10, were already seated at the main table with the fine china and crystal glasses. Tyler looked at me with confused eyes, asking why they couldn't eat with their cousins. Mia's bottom lip trembled. I should have seen this coming. Before we dive into what happened next, tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever felt like the family scapegoat or watched your kids get treated unfairly, hit that like button because you're going to relate to this story. And make sure you subscribe, because what my family did next was absolutely unforgivable. And you won't believe how far they went to punish me for finally standing up. Growing up, Victoria was always the favorite daughter, and I learned early to accept my place as the backup child. When we were kids, Victoria got brand new clothes from department stores while I wore her hand-me-downs that were already faded and stretched out. Her achievements were celebrated like national holidays. When she made cheerleading captain, my parents threw a party and invited the entire neighborhood. When I graduated with a 4.0 GPA from college, they skipped my ceremony because Victoria had a beauty pageant the same weekend. My academic awards gathered dust in a drawer, while Victoria's participation trophies lined the fireplace mantel. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was the strong one who didn't need constant validation. That was my first mistake, making excuses for people who should have loved me equally. The favoritism followed us into adulthood and somehow got worse. I married Jake, a hard-working mechanic with calloused hands and a genuine heart. Victoria married Preston, a corporate lawyer with a corner office and a BMW. My parents made it clear who had married better. Every family gathering became a showcase for Victoria's superior life choices. She lived in a 4-bedroom colonial with a manicured lawn and a 3-car garage. Jake and I owned a modest 3-bedroom ranch that we'd fixed up ourselves, painting walls and refinishing floors on weekends. To my parents, our home was evidence of failure rather than honest labor and love. The comparisons never stopped flowing like poison from a leaking pipe. My mother forgot my birthday 2 years in a row but threw Victoria an elaborate surprise party with catered food and a live band. My father co-signed a loan for Victoria's luxury SUV, but told me he couldn't help when my car needed a $2,000 transmission repair. My parents babysat Victoria's kids every weekend, taking them to museums and parks and spoiling them with toys, but they were always too busy or too tired when I asked for help with Tyler and Mia. I watched my children notice the difference, saw the questions forming in their innocent eyes. Still, I kept trying to maintain the relationship because they were my parents, my only parents, and I kept hoping that something would shift. I believed that becoming a mother myself would change the dynamic, that grandchildren would be the great equalizer. My kids were just as smart, just as sweet, just as deserving of love as Victoria's children. Surely my parents would see that, and finally treat all their grandchildren the same. I was terribly, devastatingly wrong. I arrived at my parents' house 3 hours before dinner, just like I did every Thanksgiving, ready to help cook and set the table. Victoria breezed in 45 minutes before everyone sat down, carrying a store-bought pumpkin pie still in its plastic container. My mother practically sang her praises for being so thoughtful and bringing dessert, completely ignoring the green bean casserole it spent 2 hours preparing from scratch that morning. While I chopped vegetables and basted the turkey, my mother criticized every move I made. The casserole had too much salt, even though she hadn't tasted it yet. The rolls I'd baked were too brown on the edges. Meanwhile, Victoria's store-bought pie was declared perfect and placed in the center of the dessert table like a crown jewel. I bit my tongue and kept working because that's what I always did, swallowing disappointment like bitter medicine. When it came time to set the table, I carefully arranged place settings for everyone, making sure all the grandchildren would sit together at one end where they could talk and laugh. I put out the good plates, the ones with the gold trim that only came out for holidays, and folded cloth napkins into little triangles the way my grandmother had taught me. Then my mother walked into the dining room and immediately started rearranging everything I'd done. She removed Tyler and Maya's plates from the main table without a word of explanation. I watched, confused, as she set up a small folding table in the corner of the room, the kind you'd use for a card game or a puzzle. That's where she placed my children's settings, using the everyday dishes instead of the holiday china. When I asked what she was doing, she waved me off and said she'd explain later. My stomach twisted with a sick feeling I couldn't name yet. Dinner time arrived, and my father called everyone to the table. He said grace, and I'll never forget his words because they cut like a knife wrapped in religion. He thanked God for family, for abundance, and specifically for Victoria's successful family and well-behaved children. No mention of my family at all, as if we were invisible or irrelevant. Then my mother carried out the turkey on a silver platter, golden and beautiful, and began serving Victoria's kids first. She placed generous portions of white meat on their plates, added stuffing and mashed potatoes with gravy, cranberry sauce, and roasted vegetables. Tyler watched this happening, and when the platter came near our side of the room, he raised his hand politely like he was in school and asked if he could please have some turkey. My mother looked at him like he'd asked for something unreasonable and said, "Wait your turn. The older cousins eat first." Tyler's face fell. He was 7 years old, older than Victoria's youngest son, who was only 6 and already eating. I pointed this out to my mother, trying to keep my voice steady. Her response made my blood run cold. "Victoria's children have better table manners, Harper. They know how to wait patiently." My sister sat there at the table, cutting her older daughter's meat, saying absolutely nothing in defense of my children. She didn't even look at me. Her silence was its own form of cruelty, a choice to let this happen. My father backed up my mother without hesitation, stating that it was their house and their rules, as if basic decency was subject to house rules like shoes at the door. Jake reached for my hand under the table and squeezed it hard. I could feel him wanting to explode, to flip the table and walk out, but I shook my head slightly. I didn't want to cause a scene in front of all the kids, didn't want to ruin the holiday for everyone else, so we sat there, my children and I, and watched Victoria's kids eat while Tyler's stomach growled loudly enough for everyone to hear and Mia's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. I felt like the worst mother in the world for not grabbing my babies and walking out right then. 20 minutes passed while Victoria's children ate their fill, and my kids sat at that folding table in the corner, watching and waiting. Tyler was so good, so patient, even though I could see his little hands gripping the edge of the table. Mia started crying softly, and I pulled her onto my lap, whispering that they'd get to eat soon, hating myself for the lie because I didn't know if it was true. Finally, after Victoria's kids had eaten most of what was on their plates and the adults had served themselves, my mother stood up and walked toward the kitchen. I felt a flutter of hope that maybe she was going to bring out fresh servings for my children. Instead, she returned with 2 plates that had clearly been scraped together from what was left. The turkey on those plates was mostly skin and gristle, the parts nobody wanted. The mashed potatoes had dried out and formed a crust from sitting too long. There was no cranberry sauce left. No rolls, no stuffing, just scraps. She placed these plates in front of my children like she was doing them a favor, and Tyler looked up at me with the question written all over his face. Why were they getting garbage while their cousins got a feast? I looked at the main table where Victoria's kids had left half their food uneaten, perfectly good portions going to waste, and something inside me started to crack. I stood up and asked my mother politely if my kids could please have fresh servings, explaining that the food she'd given them had gone cold and wasn't the good parts of the meal. My mother's face hardened into an expression I'd seen 1,000 times growing up, the look that said I was being difficult and ungrateful. She told me in a tight voice that we don't waste food in this house, and my children could eat what was available or go hungry. Then my father chimed in with the comment that broke me. He looked directly at Tyler and Mia and said, "You should be grateful for the crumbs from the table." He said it like he was teaching them a biblical lesson, like they were dogs begging for scraps instead of his grandchildren who deserved dignity. Victoria actually laughed at that moment, a light tinkling sound that made my skin crawl. She said her children had earned their meal by being well-behaved, implying that mine had not, even though they'd done nothing wrong except exist. Jake leaned close to me and whispered that we should leave right now, But I looked at my kids and saw how hungry they were. Tyler's stomach had been growling for over an hour. Maya's lips were pale. I couldn't take them home without feeding them, even if it meant swallowing my pride and letting them eat scraps. So I nodded at them, gave them permission to eat what they'd been given, and watched my babies pick at cold, unappetizing food while trying not to cry. They ate fast, shoveling food into their mouths because they were starving, and my mother had the audacity to complain that they were eating too quickly and needed to learn proper table manners. My father launched into a lecture about gratitude, about appreciating what you have, directing every word at my 7- and 5-year-old children as if they were the problem. Meanwhile, Victoria pulled out her phone and started recording her kids playing in the living room after dinner. She was composing the perfect social media post about blessed family time and traditions, capturing every angle of her perfect children in their perfect outfits, having a perfect holiday. The post would show none of what had actually happened, none of the cruelty, just a filtered version of family harmony. When it came time for the family photo, my mother gathered everyone in front of the fireplace. She positioned Victoria's family in the center, my parents on either side, and began snapping pictures. Tyler and Mia stood off to the side, waiting to be called into the frame. They never were. My mother took 15 photos without once asking my children to join. When Tyler tried to step into the frame on his own, my father physically moved him back, saying they had enough pictures already. That's when I decided we were done. I told Jake to get the kids' coats. We were leaving. The car ride home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Nobody spoke at first. Jake's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles went white, and I could practically feel the anger radiating off him in waves. In the back seat, Tyler and Mia sat quietly, which was somehow worse than if they'd been crying or complaining. I kept glancing at them in the rearview mirror, watching their small faces process what had just happened to them. About halfway home, Tyler broke the silence with the question it'd been dreading. "Mom, why don't Grandma and Grandpa like us?" His voice was so small, so genuinely confused, and it shattered what was left of my composure. Mia immediately followed with her own question, asking if they'd done something wrong to make their grandparents angry. My chest felt like it was caving in. These babies thought they were at fault for adult cruelty. I struggled to find words that wouldn't damage them further, but also wouldn't be a complete lie. I wanted to protect them from the ugliness of what had happened. Wanted to shield them from knowing that their own grandparents had chosen to hurt them deliberately. But I also couldn't tell them it was all fine and normal, because it absolutely wasn't. I settled on saying that sometimes grown-ups make unfair choices, and it has nothing to do with the kids themselves. I told them they were wonderful, perfect, and loved beyond measure. Jake was less diplomatic. He wanted to tell them the truth, that their grandparents were playing favorites and being cruel, but I begged him with my eyes to wait until the kids were in bed. We needed to present a united front, and I needed time to figure out how to explain this without poisoning my children's hearts with bitterness. When we got home, I made the kids a proper dinner, heating up leftover pizza that Wed saved from earlier in the week. It was their favorite, and watching them finally eat real food in the safety of our kitchen made me want to cry. I gave them extra hugs at bedtime, tucking them in with promises that tomorrow would be better. Tyler asked if Wed'd be going back to Grandma and Grandpa's house for Christmas, and I couldn't answer him. I just kissed his forehead and told him to get some sleep. After the kids were finally down, I walked into the living room where Jake was pacing like a caged animal. The moment he saw me, everything he'd been holding back exploded out. He wanted to drive back to my parents' house and confront them. He wanted to call them and tell them exactly what he thought of their behavior. He was furious, and honestly, his anger felt validating because it'd been making excuses for my family for so long that it'd started to believe maybe I was overreacting. But then Jake told me something I didn't know. He said my family had been making comments about his job for years, subtle digs about him being just a mechanic, about our modest lifestyle, about how we couldn't afford the things Victoria's family could. Had been absorbing these insults silently because he didn't want to cause problems for me, didn't want to be the reason I lost my family. Hearing this broke something inside me. It'd been so focused on managing my own hurt that I hadn't seen how they were hurting my husband too. And now they'd moved on to hurting our children, the most innocent people in this whole mess. That's when I started crying for real. Not the silent tears it'd been holding back, but deep, body-shaking sobs. I admitted to Jake that I'd been in denial about how bad things really were, that I'd been clinging to this fantasy that my parents would eventually change, that Victoria would eventually grow up and stop competing with me. Jake held me while I cried and told me it was time to set real boundaries. We stayed up until 2 in the morning, talking about what that would look like. I decided I wouldn't subject my kids to that kind of treatment anymore. Couldn't watch them be humiliated and made to feel less than. But I also didn't know how to enforce boundaries without losing my family completely. And that terrified me. Despite everything, they were still my parents. Victoria was still my sister. The idea of cutting them off felt like amputating a part of myself, even if that part was infected. Jake said I needed to choose between protecting toxic people's feelings and protecting our children's well-being. When he put it that way, the choice should have been obvious. But years of conditioning as the family peacemaker made it feel impossible. I told him I'd think about what to do next, how to approach this, but deep down I knew things had changed permanently. I couldn't unsee what I'd seen, couldn't unknow what I now knew about how little my family valued my children. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing non-stop with notifications. My head was pounding from crying and lack of sleep, and for a brief moment, I'd forgotten the horror of the previous day. Then I opened Facebook and reality came crashing back worse than before. Victoria had posted a carefully curated photo from Thanksgiving dinner. The family gathered around the table with smiles that looked genuine if you didn't know the truth. My children weren't in the picture. They'd been cropped out of the family narrative entirely, erased like they'd never been there at all. But that wasn't even the worst part. The caption made my stomach drop. Victoria had written, "So grateful for family who appreciates our traditions and knows how to raise grateful, well-mannered children. Thanksgiving reminded me how blessed we are." Shed tagged me in the post, ensuring I'd see it, ensuring everyone would know exactly who she was talking about. The comments section was already filling up with responses from extended family members, and every single one felt like a knife in my back. Aunt Diane, my mother's older sister, commented, "Some people just don't teach their kids proper manners anymore. It's sad." Cousin Brett added, "I heard there was drama at dinner. Some folks are never happy." Then my own mother commented on Victoria's post, and her words made me physically ill. Some people are never satisfied, no matter how much you try to include them. Very disappointing. She was talking about me, painting me as the ungrateful villain who'd somehow ruined Thanksgiving by having the audacity to expect my children to be fed alongside their cousins. The narrative was being rewritten in real time, and I was being cast as the problem. My phone started ringing with texts and calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in months, all of them asking what had happened, why I'd caused a scene, whether it was true that I'd stormed out over nothing. Nobody was asking for my side of the story. They'd already decided based on Victoria's carefully crafted post and my mother's backing of her version. I tried calling my mother first, thinking maybe we could talk privately and clear this up before it got worse. She answered on the 4th ring, and before I could even say hello, she launched into me. I was accused of embarrassing the family by leaving early, of being dramatic and oversensitive, of poisoning my children against their grandparents. When I tried to explain what had actually happened, how my kids had been made to wait and eat scraps, she talked right over me. According to her, I'd misinterpreted everything. They were simply teaching all the children patience and gratitude. The fact that only my children had to wait was apparently irrelevant. I hung up feeling worse than before and decided to try reaching out to Victoria directly. I sent her a text message that simply said, "You know what really happened yesterday. Why are you lying about it?" Her response came back within minutes, and the cruelty of it took my breath away. "I'm not lying about anything. You're just jealous, Harper. You always have been. Maybe if you'd made better choices in life, your kids would get treated better too." She was saying that my children deserved to be treated as less than because I'd married a mechanic instead of a lawyer, because we lived in a modest house instead of a mansion. She was justifying the mistreatment of innocent children based on their parents' income level. I read that text 5 times, each time hoping I'd misunderstood, but the meaning was crystal clear. My sister genuinely believed that wealth determined worth, that her children were superior to mine because they had more money. I decided to comment on her Facebook post, Not to attack her, but simply to share what had actually happened so our extended family would know the truth. I wrote a calm, factual account of how my children had been seated separately, made to wait while others ate, and given leftover scraps. I hit post and watched the comment appear under Victoria's photo. It stayed visible for maybe 90 seconds before it vanished. Shed deleted it. I tried again with a shorter version, just stating that my kids had been excluded and asking why. Deleted again within a minute. Then I received a notification that it had been blocked from Victoria's page entirely. She was controlling the narrative completely, making sure only her version of events could be seen by our family and friends. Anyone who might have believed me, who might have questioned her story, would never see my side because Shed silenced me before I could speak. Extended family members who'd had seen my brief comments before they were deleted started taking sides, and unfortunately, most of them sided with Victoria without even asking me what happened. The family dynamic had always positioned Victoria as the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, and me as the problematic one, the troublemaker who complained too much. This situation fit perfectly into that existing narrative. Jake found me sitting on the couch staring at my phone, scrolling through comment after comment from relatives calling me ungrateful, dramatic, jealous, and a bad mother. He took the phone out of my hands and told me to stop reading, that I was torturing myself, but I couldn't stop. I needed to see how bad it was, needed to understand the full extent of the damage Victoria had done with a single manipulative post. Jake wanted me to make my own Facebook post telling the truth publicly, fighting fire with fire, but I couldn't do it. Airing family drama publicly felt wrong, felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But staying silent was being interpreted as guilt, as admission that Victoria's version was correct. 3 weeks crawled by after Thanksgiving. 3 weeks of near-total silence from my parents and increasingly hostile messages from Victoria through mutual family members. I'd started to believe maybe the distance was for the best, that we all needed space to cool down before trying to address what had happened. Then, on a Tuesday evening in early December, my mother called. Her tone was businesslike, almost cheerful, as if nothing had happened at all. She was calling to discuss Christmas plans and wanted to know what time we'd be arriving on Christmas Eve for our traditional dinner. The casual assumption that we'd just show up after everything that had occurred left me speechless for a moment. When I finally found my voice, I told her hesitantly that I needed to think about it, that I wasn't sure we'd be coming this year. The temperature of the conversation dropped about 40 degrees in an instant. My mother's voice went cold and sharp. "Your sister and her family are coming, Harper. We expect you to be there too. This is a family holiday." The expectation was clear. I was supposed to fall in line, pretend everything was fine, and subject my children to more of the same treatment they'd received at Thanksgiving. I gathered every ounce of courage I had and told her that we needed to talk about what happened at Thanksgiving before I could commit to Christmas. There was a long pause, and then my mother said words that still echo in my head. "There's nothing to discuss. You overreacted to nothing, embarrassed this family, and now you need to move past it." She wasn't offering to listen, wasn't interested in my perspective or my children's feelings. She simply wanted me to sweep it under the rug like I'd done with every other hurt my entire life. I tried to explain how Tyler and Mia had felt being excluded, how they'd asked me why their grandparents didn't like them, how that kind of treatment damages children. My mother interrupted me sharply. "Your children need to learn they're not special, Harper. The sooner they understand that, the better off they'll be." The directness of the insult left me reeling. She was saying explicitly that my children weren't special, weren't worthy of equal treatment, weren't deserving of basic dignity. I told her as calmly as I could manage that I wouldn't bring my kids to Christmas unless the family apologized and agreed to treat all the grandchildren equally going forward. My mother's response was laughter, actual laughter, as if I'd just told the world's funniest joke. Apologize? For what exactly? For trying to teach your children some humility? Before I could respond, I heard the phone being passed, and my father's voice came through the speaker. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He delivered an ultimatum in the same tonehead used when I was 16 and broke curfew. Either we would come to Christmas and behave appropriately, keeping our complaints to ourselves and not causing drama, or we could choose not to come at all and lose our place in this family permanently. I asked him what he meant by losing our place, and his answer was even more calculated and cruel than Id expected. He told me they were currently in the process of updating their will and family trust, and that inheritance would be distributed according to who showed proper respect and maintained family harmony. It was financial manipulation, plain and simple, threatening to disinherit me and my children if I didn't comply with their demands. He went further, spelling out exactly what losing our place would mean. They'd remove me from the family trust entirely, ensuring I'd receive nothing when they passed. My children wouldn't be included in the will at all, while Victoria's children would inherit everything. They'd cut off all contact, refuse to acknowledge birthdays or holidays, and tell the extended family that Id abandoned them, not the other way around. All of this, every bit of this punishment, simply because Id asked them to treat my children with basic human dignity. The threat was designed to scare me into submission, to make me so afraid of losing them and losing financial security that I'd accept any treatment they chose to dish out. In the background, I could hear Victoria's voice, though I couldn't make out the exact words. Then my father chuckled and said, "Victoria says you'll cave. She says you always do." That comment, more than anything else, ignited something in me that I didn't know existed. My sister knew my patterns, knew I'd spent my whole life backing down and accommodating and swallowing hurt to keep the peace. She was so confident I'd do it again that she'd actually said it out loud where my father could hear. She thought I was that predictable, that weak, that easy to control. Something shifted in that moment, something fundamental and irreversible. I opened my mouth, and words came out that surprised even me. "Then I guess we won't be there for Christmas, or any other holiday until you're ready to treat my children with respect." I hung up the phone before my father could respond, before I could second-guess myself, before fear could make me take it back. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Jake had been standing in the doorway listening to my side of the conversation, and when I told him what I'd just done, I expected him to be worried about the financial implications or concerned about burning bridges. Instead, he crossed the room and pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe, telling me he was proud of me, that I'd done the right thing, that our kids were worth more than any inheritance. But even with his support, panic started setting in almost immediately. Had I just lost my entire family? Had I just cost my children their grandparents forever? Would they resent me someday for making this choice? The questions swirled in my mind, and I felt simultaneously empowered and terrified, strong and completely lost. Later that same day, my phone rang again, and I almost didn't answer because I assumed it was my parents calling back to escalate the fight. But the name on the screen was Aunt Linda, my mother's younger sister, and curiosity made me pick up. Linda had been at Thanksgiving dinner but had stayed quiet during the whole ordeal, neither defending me nor joining in the cruelty. I'd written her off as another family member who would side with my parents by default. Her first words when I answered proved me wrong. "Harper, I need to apologize to you. I should have spoken up at Thanksgiving, and I didn't. And I've felt sick about it every day since." The emotion in her voice was genuine, and I found myself tearing up just hearing someone acknowledge what had happened. Linda told me she'd witnessed my mistreatment for years, decades even, but had stayed silent because speaking up in our family meant becoming the next target. She'd watched my parents favor Victoria since we were children, and had convinced herself it wasn't her place to interfere in how my parents raised their daughters. But seeing them extend that favoritism to the next generation, watching them deliberately humiliate my children, had been too much for her conscience to bear any longer. She apologized for not standing up for me, for not calling out my mother when she made my kids wait for scraps, for taking the coward's way out by remaining silent. Hearing her apology unlocked something in me, and I started crying properly for the first time since making the phone call to my parents. Someone believed me. Someone had seen it and knew it was wrong. Linda started sharing memories I'd either forgotten or blocked out. Instances of mistreatment that suddenly made sense in the context of a lifelong pattern. She reminded me that when I'd graduated college with a perfect 4.0 GPA, my parents had skipped the ceremony entirely because Victoria had a beauty pageant the same day 3 hours away. They'd chosen to watch Victoria compete for a plastic crown over celebrating my academic achievement. Linda also brought up something I'd never told anyone outside my immediate family. Years ago, when Jake and I had been trying for our second child, I'd miscarried at 12 weeks. I'd been devastated, grieving the loss of a baby we'd already started to love. When I'd called my mother for comfort, her response had been, "It's probably for the best, Harper. You couldn't really afford more children anyway." That comment had cut so deep I'd buried it, tried to forget it, convinced myself she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. But Linda remembered because she'd been there when my mother had made similar comments to other family members, dismissing my pain as if it didn't matter. Linda offered to talk to my parents on my behalf, to try to mediate and make them understand how destructive their behavior had been. I appreciated the offer but declined, knowing that I needed to handle this myself and that my parents wouldn't listen to anyone telling them they were wrong. But Linda gave me something more valuable than mediation. She told me I wasn't alone in seeing the problem. Other family members had been uncomfortable with the favoritism for years, but, like her, had stayed quiet out of fear or uncertainty about whether it was their place to speak up. She specifically mentioned Uncle Tom, my father's younger brother, who'd told her privately after Thanksgiving that my parents had been too hard on me my entire life. Cousin Michelle had also reached out to Linda, saying she'd noticed the Thanksgiving incident and felt terrible about not defending my children in the moment. Knowing I had quiet allies, people who'd seen the truth, even if they hadn't spoken it aloud, gave me strength I desperately needed. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't oversensitive. I wasn't imagining mistreatment or creating drama out of nothing. Multiple people had witnessed the same patterns, had felt the same discomfort, and were finally admitting it. Meanwhile, Victoria continued her social media campaign against me, posting thinly veiled comments about family members who cause unnecessary drama and sharing memes about cutting toxic people out of your life. The irony of her calling anyone toxic while actively working to destroy my reputation was apparently lost on her. My mother commented supportive messages on every single one of Victoria's posts, creating a public show of solidarity that was clearly meant to isolate me further. But something unexpected started happening. Friends from outside the family, people who knew me as a person rather than as the family scapegoat, began rallying around me. My best friend Simone called to offer to host a redo Thanksgiving at her house, saying my kids deserved to have a real holiday meal with people who loved them. Jake's family invited us to spend Christmas with them, his mother explicitly saying that all children were equally precious in their home. Even my kids' teachers reached out after noticing that Tyler and Mia seemed sad and withdrawn after Thanksgiving break. When I explained in vague terms that there'd been family conflict, both teachers offered support and reassurance that my children were wonderful, well-behaved, kind kids who were clearly being raised with love. Their words mattered more than they could have known because my mother's voice kept echoing in my head, telling me my children weren't special, weren't well-mannered, weren't deserving. I started to realize that biological family wasn't the only family that mattered. I'd been so focused on maintaining relationships with people who shared my DNA that I'd undervalued the chosen family I'd built through friendship, marriage, and community. These people saw my worth, saw my children's worth, and their love wasn't conditional on us accepting mistreatment. That realization was both liberating and sad, a recognition that I'd been fighting for scraps of affection from people who had a whole feast of love to give, but chose to withhold it. The support from outside my biological family gave me courage to keep standing firm on the boundaries I'd set, even though every day without contact from my parents felt like another small death of the relationship I'd always wished we could have. The week before Christmas, Victoria showed up at my house unannounced, and like a fool, I interpreted her arrival as a peace offering. She was alone without her kids or Preston, and she was smiling when I opened the door. She said she wanted to talk, that she'd been thinking about everything that had happened, and wanted to fix things before the holidays. The reasonable tone, the apparent concern, the lack of hostility all made me cautiously optimistic. Maybe Shed had a change of heart. Maybe Shed realized how far things had gone and wanted to repair the relationship. I invited her inside, ignoring the warning bells in my head that said this felt too easy. Tyler and Mia were thrilled to see their aunt, running to hug her with the innocent enthusiasm of children who forgive easily. Victoria had brought gifts for them, wrapped in shiny paper with elaborate bows, which was unusual because Shed never brought them gifts outside of birthdays and Christmas before. She spent nearly an hour playing with them, asking about school, complimenting their drawings, acting like the aunt I'd always wished she would be. I made coffee and watched from the kitchen, wanting to believe this was genuine but unable to fully trust it. After a while, she suggested the kids go play outside in the backyard so we could talk privately. They ran out happily, and Victoria's entire demeanor changed the moment they were out of sight. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and the warmth drained from her face like someone had flipped a switch. "I'm not here to fix anything, Harper. I'm here to deliver a message. Stop causing problems for this family." I stared at her in confusion because from my perspective, I hadn't caused any problems. I'd simply asked for my children to be treated fairly. Victoria clarified in a tone that was pure ice. Mom and Dad were in the process of finalizing their estate plans, and she wanted to make sure there were no complications. They'd decided to give her a significantly larger portion of the inheritance, but they needed me to sign a document agreeing to the unequal split. In exchange for my signature and my silence about how I'd been treated, I'd be allowed to attend Christmas and maintain some contact with the family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was asking me to legally agree to being financially discriminated against, to sign away my children's future security in exchange for the privilege of being tolerated at family gatherings where wed continue to be treated as second class. I refused immediately, telling her there was no amount of money worth accepting that kind of arrangement. Victoria's mask dropped completely then, and I saw the real her, the one who'd been hiding behind fake sweetness. She called me difficult and stubborn, said I was being unreasonable as usual, that I should be grateful they were offering me anything at all. Then she pulled out her phone, and my stomach dropped. She told me she'd been recording our entire conversation and planned to edit the recording to make it sound like I was being greedy and demanding, trying to manipulate our elderly parents out of money. The setup became clear in an instant. The gifts for my kids, the friendly act, the private conversation, all of it had been orchestrated to trap me. She'd come here planning to record me, planning to twist whatever I said into evidence that could be used against me with the family. I ordered her to leave my house immediately, and she stood up slowly, smiling in a way that made my skin crawl. Her parting words as she walked to the door were, "Mom and Dad were right about you. You never knew your place, Harper. You always thought you deserved more than you actually do." She left, and I stood in my kitchen shaking with anger and disbelief that my own sister would be so calculatingly malicious. After she drove away, I went to check on the gifts she'd brought for my kids. Tyler and Mia had already opened them outside, and what I found made me want to cry. Cheap dollar store toys, the kind that break within hours. Thoughtless items that had probably cost less than $5 total. They were props, nothing more, purchased to make Victoria look generous in front of the kids while she set her trap. Meanwhile, I knew from social media posts that Victoria's kids received expensive tablets, designer clothes, and elaborate toys from my parents on a regular basis. The inequality extended even to these manipulative gifts. That evening, the family group chat that I was still part of suddenly lit up with activity. Victoria had sent a message to everyone saying she'd tried to reconcile with me, but that I'd refused and chosen pride over family. She painted herself as the peacemaker who'd reached out in good faith, only to be rejected by her stubborn, difficult sister. The responses from extended family were immediate and condemning. I was called selfish, prideful, and destructive. Several people suggested I needed therapy, or that I was having some kind of breakdown. Before I could even formulate a response, I was removed from the group chat entirely, cut off from family communication digitally, just as I'd been cut off emotionally. The isolation was deliberate and complete, designed to punish me for not submitting to their demands. Christmas Eve arrived, and we stayed home. Jake's family came over in the afternoon, bringing warmth and laughter and genuine love into our house. His mother had made sugar cookies with Tyler and Mia, and his father had brought gifts that were thoughtful and age-appropriate. We had a small dinner that felt more like family than any holiday at my parents' house had ever felt. The kids were happy despite missing their grandparents, and I tried to focus on that rather than on the phone that kept buzzing with incoming voicemails. I didn't listen to the messages until after Tyler and Mia were tucked into bed, exhausted from playing with their new toys and full of hot chocolate and cookies. When I finally steeled myself to check the voicemails, each one was more hostile than the last. My father's message accused me of destroying the family, of being selfish and ungrateful, of teaching my children to be entitled and disrespectful. My mother's message was colder, more calculated, telling me not to expect forgiveness and that I'd made my choice to be alone. Victoria had left a message too, her voice dripping with false sympathy, as she said she hoped I was happy with my decision to isolate myself from everyone who loved me. The messages were designed to make me feel guilty, to make me second-guess my boundaries, to make me believe I was the villain in this story. For a moment, lying in bed listening to them, I almost believed it. Christmas morning brought something worse than hostile voicemails. The doorbell rang early, before the kids were even awake, and I found a courier on my doorstep with a certified letter. My hands shook as I signed for it, somehow knowing before I even opened the envelope that it was going to be bad. The letter was from my parents' attorney, formal and legal and devastating. It'd been officially removed from the family trust. All inheritance rights were being transferred solely to Victoria. No provisions would be made for my children in any estate planning. The letter stated the reason for this action was abandonment of family duties and consistent disrespect toward family elders. They were using legal language to punish me for setting boundaries, for protecting my children, for refusing to accept mistreatment. Jake found me sitting on the couch reading the letter over and over, trying to make sense of how we'd gotten here. He was furious, immediately wanting to call a lawyer and fight this. But I felt overwhelmed and defeated. We couldn't afford a lengthy legal battle, and part of me wondered if it was even worth fighting. Did I really want money from people who hated me enough to do this? But then I thought about Tyler and Mia, about their future, about college funds and security, and anger started replacing the despair. Before I could figure out what to do next, there was a knock at the door. Aunt Linda stood there with Uncle Tom, both of them looking grim. They'd received copies of the trust documents because they were listed as witnesses, and they'd driven straight to my house. What they told me changed everything. Linda and Tom had been uncomfortable with my parents' behavior for a while, but they'd discovered something that made them decide to act. My parents had been planning this trust change for months, long before Thanksgiving. Victoria had actually helped draft the letter, had been involved in discussions about how to legally justify removing me from inheritance. The Thanksgiving incident hadn't been entirely spontaneous. Victoria had suggested to my mother that they should treat my kids differently, had planted the idea of making them wait to eat. My parents had gone along with it, creating a situation they knew would push me to react. They wanted me to leave early or blow up so they could claim it abandoned the family, giving them justification for the trust changes that already planned. The betrayal was deeper than it imagined. This hadn't been a reaction to my behavior. It had been a calculated setup, a conspiracy between my sister and my parents to create a scenario where it'd look bad and they could punish me with legal and financial consequences. Victoria had wanted the full inheritance and had been willing to use her own niece and nephew as pawns to get it. My parents had been willing to traumatize their own grandchildren to manufacture an excuse for disinheriting their daughter. The premeditation of it, the cold calculation, made everything so much worse than I'd thought. I'd believed they'd acted badly in the moment, but this revealed that they'd planned to hurt me and my children for months. I felt completely defeated in that moment, sitting with the truth of how little it ever meant to them. Linda and Tom saw it on my face and immediately started talking about challenging the trust, about finding an attorney who specialized in estate law, about gathering evidence of the conspiracy. They weren't going to let this stand without a fight. Over the next few weeks, with Linda and Tom's help, I connected with an attorney named Margaret who reviewed the case and said we had grounds to challenge the trust removal if we could prove it was based on false pretenses. She told me to start documenting everything, creating a timeline, gathering witnesses. It felt impossible at first, but then something unexpected happened. Other family members started coming forward. Cousin Michelle called to say she'd witnessed the Thanksgiving incident and was willing to provide a statement about what really happened. Uncle Tom's wife, Aunt Rosa, revealed she'd been keeping records for years of the financial favoritism, documenting every expensive gift Victoria's kids received compared to the minimal gifts mine got. She had receipts going back 5 years, showing a clear pattern of discrimination. More relatives quietly reached out, people who'd seen the truth but had stayed silent out of fear. Cousin Brandon remembered hearing Victoria coaching my parents on what to say before Thanksgiving. A family friend named Dorothy had witnessed my mother making cruel comments about my children at a previous gathering. Each person who came forward strengthened the case and strengthened my resolve. Meanwhile, Victoria's life started showing cracks. Linda reported that Preston was furious about the legal costs associated with the trust battle and the restraining order I'd filed after Victoria had shown up at my house to record me. Extended family had to choose who to invite to gatherings, and increasingly, people were choosing to include me rather than Victoria because they were tired of the drama she created. Victoria's marriage was suffering under the strain, and Preston had apparently told her she'd brought this all on herself. My parents started fighting too, arguing about money and reputation and whose fault it was that the family had fractured so publicly. They'd expected me to quietly accept everything, and my decision to fight back had thrown their plans into chaos. By late February, my parents made a settlement offer through their attorney. They proposed reinstating me in the trust with a 50-50 split with Victoria, paying for therapy for my kids to help them recover from the CPS trauma Victoria had inflicted by filing a false report and making a public apology at a family gathering. In exchange, I'd drop all legal action. Margaret told me it wasn't a bad offer, but I countered with additional demands. I wanted equal treatment of all grandchildren going forward in writing, a direct written apology from Victoria, mandatory family therapy sessions, payment of my legal fees, and an automatic trust transfer if the favoritism continued. My parents balked at first, but after 2 weeks and mounting pressure from other family members who supported me, they agreed to most terms, except forcing Victoria to apologize in writing. Margaret advised me to take the deal. Getting Victoria to admit wrongdoing was unlikely, and this settlement gave me most of what I needed for my children's security and future. I agreed, not because I wanted a relationship with my parents, but because I needed to protect Tyler and Maya's financial future and set a precedent that mistreatment had real consequences. The first family therapy session was awkward and tense. My parents attended, Victoria came reluctantly without Preston, and Dr. Rodriguez, our therapist, established ground rules immediately. Everyone would speak without interruption, focus on behaviors, not character attacks, and work toward understanding patterns to create change. The session revealed painful truths. My mother admitted she'd always felt Victoria needed more support because she seemed more fragile while I seemed stronger. My father admitted he was proud of Victoria's status and wealth, and felt I'd settled for less in life, so he treated us accordingly. Victoria refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing, claiming she was just defending herself and that I was too sensitive. She blamed me for making everything public and wouldn't apologize. Dr. Rodriguez pointed out that Victoria was deflecting responsibility, and Victoria stormed out. After she left, my parents seemed uncomfortable but immediately started making excuses for her. The therapist called it enabling. I stated clearly that I was there to protect my children, not to fix my sister. Over the following months, I allowed supervised contact with my parents. They attended Tyler's soccer game and took both kids for ice cream afterward with Jake and me present. They came to Maya's birthday party and brought thoughtful gifts they'd consulted me about first. Small steps that showed they were trying, even if imperfectly. But they still mentioned Victoria constantly, testing whether I'd relent. I stayed firm, and they stopped pushing. Victoria's life continued to unravel. Preston filed for divorce. She had to sell her house and downsize, and she lost friends who saw her true character. She started therapy court-ordered for custody, which gave me hope that maybe eventually she'd find healing too. 6 months after that terrible Thanksgiving, my life had transformed. Tyler and Mia had recovered. Our home was filled with love, and Jake and I were stronger than ever. My parents were making efforts to change, though decades of patterns didn't shift overnight. I'd developed closer relationships with the relatives who'd supported me. Aunt Linda had become like a second mother. I'd learned that boundaries aren't punishment but protection, that speaking truth was necessary even when scary, that worth is inherent, not earned, and that forgiveness doesn't require accepting mistreatment. The relationship with my parents would never be what I'd hoped, but I'd accepted that. What mattered was that Tyler and Mia would never wonder if they were loved equally. They'd never be told to wait for crumbs. They'd know their mother fought for them. That Thanksgiving had changed everything when I'd watched my children's faces as they waited to eat. The moment I decided enough was enough. Was it worth the conflict and pain and loss? Absolutely yes, because my children know they matter. They're not second best, and they deserve to be at the table with full plates. I learned that sometimes protecting the ones you love means walking away from the ones you hoped would love you. And there's peace in that truth. Life continues now. This Thanksgiving, I'm hosting with Jake's family, Aunt Linda, Uncle Tom, and chosen friends. My kids will sit at the head of the table with plates full of food they chose. No one will wait for crumbs. Parents are invited if they continue therapy and show real change. The door isn't closed completely, but boundaries remain firm. This is how it should have always been. This is how it will be going forward. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to teach your children that love requires accepting crumbs. Sometimes love means demanding the whole meal or walking away from the table entirely. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between protecting your children and keeping peace with toxic family members? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments below because your experience might help someone else going through the same thing. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more real stories about family, boundaries, and finding strength when it matters most. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that they're not wrong for standing up to mistreatment, even when it comes from family. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it gave you courage to set your own boundaries if you need to. Remember, you deserve to be at the table, not waiting for crumbs. Take care of yourselves and each other.